God, the very first word in the prayer, raises questions in the minds of many people, perhaps in most of us. Yet if we are to pray the prayer at all, we need some sort of understanding of what or who God is. For some people, an understanding of God is not a problem. It's obvious. For me, and I'm sure for some others, belief is not that simple. In fact, the more I think about God, the more complicated it becomes. Perhaps some of those who choose to accept trust in God so quickly are just closing their eyes to the areas of life that might complicate their beliefs. I once heard someone say, religious people aren't very thoughtful, and thoughtful people aren't very religious. When I first heard that statement, it seemed quite true. Yet since then, I have met a growing number of people who are both religious in the best sense of the word and are very thoughtful as well. What do they believe about God? Or to be more specific, how can I, as a thoughtful person, understand God? What I need is some sort of understanding that does not require me to deny some of the realities I see in the world around me. I see examples of suffering and injustice that the simple words "have faith" just don't solve. It is not that I have to have all the answers before I have some kind of trust. In a lot of areas of life, I trust even though my knowledge is incomplete. For example, when I drive my car to the airport and get on a plane, I trust myself to the care of the pilot without much information about him or her as a person. But my trust is not unreasonable. At least, I am not expected to accept things about the pilot that are contrary to my best thinking. Some religious claims, however, seem inconsistent with what my mind tells me is true. I have to weigh what religious authorities say with other experiences in life, and sometimes the two just do not match. No matter how much I am told that I ought to believe in someone else's concept of God, unless it makes sense deep within myself, I cannot accept it. The only God that I can have a relationship with is one consistent with my own thoughts when I am thinking most clearly. For example, I have found it difficult to accept without question the concept that God is all-powerful and all-loving. When I first heard that description, it raised some problems for me. If God is so powerful and loving, why are there so many tragedies in the world? Perhaps God is loving but not powerful, or powerful but not loving. I could not see how it would be both ways. Yet there are people, thoughtful people, who have faced deep personal suffering whose definition of God still includes the words powerful and loving. Evidently, different ways of understanding God are possible, and what I need is a definition so large that I will not have to discard it as I become more and more aware of the world around me. Some descriptions of God are so limiting that when I have tried to fit them with my personal experience, I have been greatly disappointed. In The Color Purple, author Alice Walker uses these words to express the feelings of one of her characters, a black woman. When I found out I thought God was white and a man, I lost interest. This comment illustrates what is generally true for most of us. The way we think about God ultimately affects how we relate to God. On August 6, 1961, Russian cosmonaut Herman Titov began the first extended journey through space, circling the Earth more than 17 times. While passing over Japan, he received a radio message that was evidently meant for him. It was in very bad Russian, and he laughed, telling about it later. But I could make out quite clearly that it was directed to me. They, on the ground, were talking about God and of angels and of the heavens. I looked through the window of the spaceship and thought, if there was a God here, I couldn't see him. Ideas of God from past generations, such as human-like figures up in the sky, no longer make sense for a great many people. Scientific research in areas such as astronomy, psychology, had radically changed how we see our world and ourselves. This changed perspective has inevitably influenced our thought about God and our relationship with God as well. Someone once defined superstition as giving religious significance to our ignorance. A lot of ideas about God do grow out of ignorance, yet it is also true that some people have been given a great deal of thought to what it means to relate to God. Theology has been called the science of God from theos, the Greek word for God. The central concern of such theology, both past and present, is to think clearly about God. For some people, however, this kind of thinking raises other questions. The theologian C.S. Lewis tells of an experience he once had while giving a talk about his understanding of God. A member of the audience stood up afterwards and said, "I've no use for all this stuff. But mind you, I'm a religious man too. I know there's a God. I felt him, out alone in the desert at night. The tremendous mystery. And that's just why I don't believe all your neat little dogmas and formulas about him. To anyone who's met the real thing, they all seem pretty pedantic and unreal." Lewis replied that he agreed with the man. "There is a difference," he said, "between an experience of God and saying something about God. Talking about God can be a turning from something real to something less real, like looking at the Atlantic Ocean from the beach and then turning to look at a map of the Atlantic. It means going from real waves to colored paper, yet the map is based on what hundreds and thousands of people have found out about that ocean. It has behind it masses of experiences, just as real as the one you would have from it from the beach, only while yours would be a single isolated glimpse. The map fits all those isolated religious experiences together. Doctrines are not God, they are only a kind of map." The author of the Serenity Prayer is a person who not only studied what others thought about God, but also has constantly sought to relate his own experience to such learning. To understand the prayer, it might be useful to know something about the person who wrote it and how he thought about God from his own experience and study. Reinhold Niebuhr is considered to be the author of the prayer, although he may have drawn on previous sources. He was at the faculty of the Union Theological Seminary in New York for many years, and occasionally he preached in a small church near his summer home in Heath, Massachusetts. After Niebuhr used the prayer in a worship service at the church in 1934, Harold Chandler Robbins, a Summit neighbor, asked for a copy. Niebuhr reportedly handed him the original with words such as, "Here, take the prayer, I have no further use for it." His original wording was, "O God, give us serenity to accept the things that cannot be changed, courage to change what should be changed, and wisdom to distinguish the one from the other." Robbins, the neighbor, printed it in a pamphlet the following year. It was later published in newspapers and included literature by Alcoholics Anonymous and other groups. One of the values of this prayer is the way in which it enriches our understanding of God. Each phrase implies something about who God is and what it means to have a relationship with a higher power. Niebuhr's approach to understanding God is useful because it is based not on some vague abstract concept, but on the human experience of God in the concrete world in which we live. At the heart of Niebuhr's faith is the belief that the way we understand God directly affects the way we understand ourselves and the actions we take in life. It is not uncommon to find people making important changes based on their understanding of God. Some belief relates to a moral decision. Some make decisions out of fear of punishment from God. Others out of a response to what they see as God's love. Some see terrorism as a fulfillment of God's will, and I look forward to a reward from God for martyrdom. Taking a courageous stand on the unpopular issue may be related directly to an understanding of God's will. Actions, both positive and negative, can be greatly affected by a person's belief in God. Some people, however, think that the belief in God has little or no effect on their actions. They see themselves as primarily neutral about such matters. A common notion is that people either have a response to God or they do not. Actually, it is not that simple. Once the word God has been used, everyone who reads or hears that word is affected in some way. No one can be completely neutral. There will always be some sort of connection or response to whatever the word God means to each person. One person may experience puzzlement, for another it may be peace. For another it may be anger, gratitude, fear, or something else. Once God is named, a response of some sort occurs toward whatever comes to mind when the word God is spoken. And the quality or character of our response is determined by our definition of God. Even if we define God as not there, we are still experiencing some response. A child with an absent parent is never completely neutral about the situation. If some children have fathers and you do not, you experience some response to the word father. Saying it doesn't matter to me at all may not quite ring true. Emotionally, the situation has some effect on you, if only a vague uncertainty deep within. People who say that belief in God does not matter at all often secretly live with the feeling of uncertainty about it. We cannot deliberately reject something without defining what we are rejecting. The question is not, does God have a meaning for me, but what kind of meaning does God have? Some definitions of God are better than others. At least some definitions are clearly more acceptable than others. Some definitions fit better than what rings true within us. To develop a trusting relationship with God requires some risk, taking on our part a willingness to explore seriously our own understanding of what God means to us. Probably the major barrier to growth that we face as human beings is our tendency to hold tight to what is familiar. The primary purpose of psychotherapy is, in fact, to help people recognize which patterns, perhaps useful in the past, may not necessarily be appropriate in the present. One of the greatest contributions of Reinhold Niebuhr's was his challenge to fixed and rigid positions people held about religion. He was especially critical of church members who were piously optimistic about their own moral goodness. He once put it this way: if there were a drunken orgy somewhere, I would bet 10 to 1 a church member was not in it. But if there was a lynching, I would bet 10 to 1 a church member was in it. Over and over, Niebuhr challenged the self-righteous of those in the church who used belief in God to arrogantly justify their actions. Niebuhr also pointed out, however, that while some of the church protect themselves by closing their minds, some outside the church are also not open to new knowledge. Some people reject all contact with religion because of childish ideas about God, concepts that thoughtful people have long since outgrown. A tendency is widespread today to assume, in the name of tolerance, that all beliefs are of equal value, that it is a sign of prejudice to state that any viewpoint in life is better than another. Yet the word prejudice means to prejudge, to jump to conclusions about something without really examining it. Tolerance does not require believing that all statements about something are of equal value and equally true. To have respect for another person is not the same as agreeing with the other person's viewpoint, no matter what it may be. If we are to have a clear understanding of who God is and who we are, one of the first requirements is a willingness to explore what thoughtful people say about their relationship with God without prejudging it. In the Serenity prayer, Niebuhr expresses thoughts and feelings about God that were a part of his life and career over a period of years. While the original prayer contains only 27 words, and the simplified version even fewer, it is important to note that the perspective presented in the prayer is not casual. It emerges out of many years of experience and thought. Even though Niebuhr's viewpoint may not completely fit with our own, we may still find it useful to stand where he stood and look at the world from his perspective. Whether another viewpoint is the same or in contrast with our own, sharing in another's experience, strength and hope can often help us see our own experience more clearly. Each of the following chapters expands on what has been said about God in this chapter. As we explore the rest of the words and phrases of the Serenity Prayer, it will be useful to keep returning to your own thought and experience on the basis of belief, and to keep asking, how does the perspective in this prayer fit in with my own understanding and God and myself?